So let's talk about some of the stuff about your speech that got the most attention. You spent an awful lot of time talking about education, and of course, you've called this the education session. It's prompted us here to have a series of conversations about education on the air, and we'll probably be getting into some of the things that I've been hearing from people over the course of the hour. The part that got the most attention was the section on teacher tenure. I'm wondering if you can briefly give us an outline of what exactly it is you've proposed to change the rules around teacher tenure and teacher evaluations that have gotten so much attention over the course of the last couple of days.
Tenure needs to mean something a little different than it currently does. And basically in Connecticut, tenure as it's currently constructed and enforced means that you have lifetime employment. And you have lifetime employment as long as your production level doesn't rise to incompetence. And what we're saying is, we need something slightly better than incompetence. And we need an evaluation system that assures us that everyone is educating our children to the best of their ability. So that we need a different standard. We need to hold people accountable for true production in the business that they're in. And the business they're in is educating our young people. So here I sit in Hartford in this studio. The most recent test indicates that 42% of 8th graders do not read in Hartford on a proficient level. I mean, should we tolerate that? Should we not do everything in our power to address that issue? And so what we're saying is tenure, what it really should mean is that you're a good, great teacher, and the tenure protection is that if you fall below an acceptable standard based on what has already been agreed to on an evaluation basis through a committee that had representatives of both teachers' unions on it. If you fall below that and you're a tenured teacher, the district's got to work with you and make sure that you're given all the tools to get back to where you need to be, including individual coaching. So, we've said the CEU system where people are, sit down in a large auditorium and get lectured is not the best way to intervene and to make sure that we're getting the best possible teaching in our schools.
So one of the things that a lot of people have asked us to ask you is that because of the amount of focus that you put on the teacher tenure issue in your State of the State address, it was a large part of the speech, and you laid out an awful lot more about teacher tenure than people normally would hear from the governor of the state. And because of some of the conversations we've had afterward, it suggested, I think, to many teachers and their supporters that this, you believe, is the overriding factor that accounts for 42% of kids in Hartford not achieving at the level, or that some other schools aren't achieving the level, that this is the biggest problem in education. Do you believe that teacher tenure is the biggest problem in education right now?
I think it's a problem,
Yeah.
just as I think all of the other things that are addressed in a 163-page comprehensive legislation that we have submitted and that I spoke about literally from January 5th through the first day of the session, February 8th, rolling out various aspects day after day after day after day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I knew that anything I said on tenure would be the most controversial. And the listeners couldn't hear that shaking of your head in the positive direction. So no matter what I did about tenure, it was going to be controversial because you have folks who say, hey, listen, this is, you can't touch this. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is we can't get to where we need without having an honest discussion about tenure. So every time I speak to a teacher or an administrator, I ask the following question. Do you have children? And more often than not, they say yes. And I said, when your children were going to school, was there one teacher in a building that you wanted your children to avoid ever having? Mm-hmm. And they'd pause, and then they'd say yes. Or they'd say, well, that's not the question. And then I'd push it, and they'd say, well, yes. The reality is, and I had this wonderful conversation with Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation for Teachers, when she came to speak about education reform at our invitation. I said, if we could build a system where we actually had teachers rate one another, I posited that I believe that we'd have 90% agreement on who the weakest teachers are in any given school if we left it up to teachers. And she thought about it, and she basically agreed that would allow us to evaluate teachers. Teachers know what's going on in the building. I gave a speech to the CEA over the summer in which I talked about the fact that every teacher deserves to have colleagues in the building working as hard as they are, as professional as they are, and it was an applause line at that speech. But now that we actually are saying something substantive about the subject, it becomes a difficult discussion to have because people are going to try to incite other people to oppose anything happening with tenure, even though both unions that represent teachers in the state have said that changes have to take place.
Since the unions have said that, though, and since your speech, since all of your plans have rolled out, the teachers' unions have seemingly backed off of any support for this. What can you do to get the teachers' unions on the same page of this? Because without their help, it's going to be very hard to make these changes.
You know, I think they're in a very difficult position. They agreed to an evaluation system that is student performance based. They agreed to it. Now, was that agreement supposed to have any meaning at all? When they made those agreements, were they actually looking toward better teaching? Or was this a game that was being played? And I don't believe it was a game. I believe that they honestly want to see teacher improvement. Let me just finish. So I actually believe that they honestly want to see teacher improvement. But I also understand that it's very difficult for them to have this discussion, particularly when they've said year after year after year, at least one of the unions, that we can never have a meaningful discussion about this. Now let's scratch this a little bit closer. What we have seen by one of the unions, in New Haven specifically, is a system not unlike the one that we're talking about, which has led to teacher improvement and people being separated from the New Haven school system. So one of the organizations has already agreed to that. So I understand that this is a difficult discussion to have, but this is the time that we have to have difficult discussions.
Well, we're talking with Governor Daniel Malloy, and you can join us at 860-275-7266. Again, 860-275-7266. He's here to answer some of your questions, which we'll get to in just a moment here. Do you believe that the current state of the student evaluation system, though, is robust enough, that we know enough about how to test students so that we can really evaluate teachers and also superintendents, principals, and everyone else on that basis? Are we really where we need to be with student evaluations right now?
No, we need to get better. Yeah. But that's why this agreement with respect to how to evaluate teachers and administrators is so very important. It in many ways is the cornerstone of what we're trying to build. But the idea that you're only going to evaluate people before they have tenure and then have somebody live a life in a school system for 20 or 25 years and not be evaluated, does that honestly make any sense at all?